Welcome back to episode number 2 of Physique Science Radio, presented by BioLane LLC. I'm your host, Lane Norton, with my co-host, Sohee Lee. Sohee, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. I'm chomping on some frozen grapes, hanging out, wrapped up work for the night.
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought up the grape thing because, our topic tonight is extremely controversial and gets people fired up a lot on both sides. And so we're going to talk about clean eating versus if it fits your macros, IIFYM, aka flexible dieting, those sorts of things. And so I think we have a really cool perspective on this because I think both you and I have done it both ways. And we can give our perspective on what we like. But let me ask you this. Would grapes be considered clean, though?
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, not sure if clean because it's a fruit with fiber, but it has sugar. Well, wait, hang on. Are they organic?
No, they're not.
Not clean.
So definitely not clean.
Yeah, not clean. Okay, so you guys can probably tell which way we're going to lean a little bit on this, but we're also going to have a special guest. Not in the next segment, we're going to have my good friend, Ben Esgro. For those of you who are not familiar with Ben, I consider him one of the brightest people in the industry that few people know about. Although more people are knowing about him now, so I won't be able to say that forever. A couple of years ago, I used to say, yeah, he's the smartest guy that nobody knows about. And now it's like, well, I can't really say that anymore because more people are finding out because he's getting good information out there. So, looking forward to having him on in the next section. But I just wanted to introduce this with, I started in bodybuilding when I was about 19 or 18 years old. And I would read the muscle magazines like anybody else. And one of the things, especially at college, my first semester at college, when I decided I wanted to do a show, I would read, I had no information, so I was reading the muscle magazines, and I'd say, okay, I need to do this diet that's in Flex magazine, right? So how am I going to do that? Well, I started looking at what the diets were, and I said, well, I can't afford those foods. They don't have them at the cafeteria. I can't get those foods. And so it's like, well, do I not do it at all? And because at the end, though, they listed the macronutrient intake. It's this many protein, this many carbs, this many fats. And I'm like, okay, well, I can do that. Like at least if I'm not getting the exact foods they want, I can do that, And so I kind of started doing If It Fits Your Macros before it was called If It Fits Your Macros. But, certainly my first show, basically what I subsisted on was oatmeal, broccoli, and if I wanted to get creative, I would take a chicken breast and I would melt cheese over it, which I guess, I don't know, some people might say that's not clean, but, whatever. I would take a chicken breast, melt low-fat cheese over it, and put pasta sauce on top, and I was like chicken parmesan, and I would consider that getting, a big treat. That was like extremely inventive for me, and but I kind of went the whole way. I didn't eat any ice cream, didn't have any pizza, didn't have any of the kind of the normal foods that a teenager would have. I didn't have those. And after the show, I went berserk, having every food that I never got a chance to have, and did that for a multitude of shows. And then the last prep I did in 2010, I said, I'm tired of this whole rebound. I'm tired of putting on 10, 15 pounds in a day, and it's staying on. Everybody's, well, it's just water. It's water. Don't worry about it. Well, then I've carried that water from age 19 till now. So that's always funny when people are like, yeah, it's just water. It's like, well, then how come you never get rid of it? So I said, well, you know what, for this next prep, I'm going to count my macronutrients and I'm going to hit my fiber intake, but I'm not going to deny myself the things that I would normally have, so I ate ice cream during the prep. I made myself, it's hard to get pizza in kind of a dieting macros unless you're kind of what we call a macronator, somebody who can eat a lot of macros. But I would make my own like pizza with flatbread and low-fat cheese and all this sort of stuff. and turkey pepperoni, and so that satisfied like that craving. And after the show, I didn't blow up. I put 20 pounds on over the 3 years post show. But it was very slow, very controlled, and very comfortable. And so it wasn't a 20-pound blow up. Immediately post show where you just feel terrible. So that was kind of my experience with If It Fits Your Macros. And I'm not going to give my perspective on coaching, but I wanted to see what your experience was personally with the kind of the clean eating versus If It Fits Your Macros.
Yeah, well, I first started. I learned about fitness, bodybuilding, figure competitors, all that stuff back in 2008. That was my first introduction to the fitness world. So that's when I learned about high protein diets, things like that. So I was quote unquote clean eating because that's what they preach in the magazines, especially at the time. So I was, treating it was like a Bible to me, fitness Bible. So I followed all their meal plans, and I just, but I actually realized I felt on top of the world. I thought that I was doing really great things. I was making great progress in the gym, but I realized that almost immediately I began binging on a weekly basis right away on all the things that I, had forbidden. But I didn't realize. I didn't understand that there was a better way, so I continued in that way for a long time. Later that year, I hired a coach, my first online coach ever, and we dieted down. We dieted me down to my lowest weight, and interestingly enough, I actually rebounded without having competed ever. That time. Yeah, it was like, I was doing, I was on stress and restrictive diet. I think I was on 900 calories a day, doing 5 hours of steady state cardio a week, and it was a meal plan too. And I was in college, mind you.
Yeah.
My first year of college, so it was very, very stressful. So when I finished the diet, I put on 20 pounds in about a month.
Oh.
Just from
You're pretty tiny too.
And I'm 5'2". Yeah, I'm 5'2".
Yeah.
So it was a very noticeable difference. So I struggled with that for a while. Then when it came around to my first prep for my first show, this was in 2011. I was with the same coach. He gave me meal plans like he always did, but again, I was still in college. I was a junior by that point. I said, well, he won't tell me what my macros are for some reason, so I'm just going to plug them in to my Calorie King and figure out my own macros, and I'm going to follow the macros, but not the meal plan. And just because for me, I was like, well, I don't want to eat, egg whites and oatmeal every morning for breakfast.
Right.
So that was my way. I didn't realize, just like you, Lane, I didn't realize what I was doing was flexible dieting, but I would eat things like, homemade quesadillas, things like that. And, I came in for my show. I did really well, and I didn't rebound. That was the first time. I felt fine. Mentally, I felt fine. I was up by maybe 5 or 6 pounds. That was it. And I felt great. And then that was when I started learning about, there's this actual term for it.
Yeah, well,
trend.
Yeah, well, it's amazing the psychology, right? I would always tell people, I never craved any kind of junk whatsoever until I said, okay, now I can't have it, right?
Oh, exactly.
And then it was like, now I really want it, you know what I mean? And you see people like, they can, eat, you see a lot of these pros who eat clean in the off season. I know some people who do, literally pack their food, but every once in a while they'll go out and they'll allow themselves something, and they don't binge. But as soon as they go in that prep and it's like, okay, I can't have this at all. I think it especially makes it worse when you're, and I don't want to get into bashing other coaches' methods, and that's not what this show is going to be about. Lord knows I've done enough of that. But I'm not saying that giving somebody a meal plan is wrong or that that's unethical or anything like that. But I think if they ask you for, what are the macros for this, or can I sub different foods, I think telling them, no, you can't have turkey instead of chicken. I think that's, I think that's just a power trip, you know,
Oh yeah.
and it really can be a problem, especially when you say, okay, well, here's your meals, and then once a week you get a free meal, you get a cheat meal. And the reasoning behind that is, well, it stokes your metabolism, and you know, you can't put on fat in one cheat meal. You know what that meal turns into? That meal turns into an eat all I possibly can until I feel sick meal, because that's their one chance to get it all in. And I know this because I have done it that way, and I've had people come to me who have been doing it that way, and they get such an unhealthy relationship with food. And this idea, you know, you guys have probably noticed when we say clean eating, we're saying quote unquote clean eating, and one of the big problems I have with clean eating, it's not that I have a problem with clean eating. I don't want to say it that way. I don't want to ever act like I'm morally superior for doing something one way versus another. But one of the major problems I have with the quote-unquote clean eating crowd is that there is no established definition. And when I say that, a lot of them will go, well, you know what it is. You know. And I'm like, well, no, I don't know. You know, because
right, like as far as cheese, clean food, or
right,
what is it?
Yeah, is fruit clean?
It's processed.
You know, because it's well, the processed ones is very funny because you know. But, you know, the organic crowd will say, well, anything that's not organic isn't clean. And then the paleo crowd will say, well, anything that's in paleo isn't clean. You know, and then if you're vegetarian, anything that isn't vegan isn't clean. So it's like there's all actually Army Leggy for Improvism.com did a great article on clean eating. And, you know, I think one of the big misconceptions of IIFYM or flexible dieting is that these people just eat crap all the time. You know, all they do is eat crap. If you're trying to hit body composition friendly macronutrient intake and get enough fiber, and that's a huge thing, all right? You can't discount the important role of fiber, because fiber is thermogenic, okay? So if you're eating, a lot of people ask me, what about all this sugar in your diet? Well, really, the issues with sugar, and from what I've seen in the research, is not so much the actual sugar content of the diet. It's the fact that most foods that are high in sugar are low in fiber. Because if you eat enough fiber with sugar, it completely blunts out the GI effect, the glycemic effect, okay? And so you could have, and that's why fruits don't have the same impact on GI as a lot of other high sugar foods. So, you know, one of the things I told people is, you know, get enough fiber in and hit your macros. And again, if you're going for a body composition friendly macronutrient intake, and we're definitely not saying macronutrient intake composition doesn't matter. You know, some people say, well, it's just calories in versus calories out. That's basically true. Macronutrient composition that you choose to fill those calories changes how many calories you expend. So your macronutrient composition is important. And so, are you going to be able to eat Pop-Tarts all day and get enough fiber and get that macronutrient-friendly composition? No.
Or hit your protein, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely not.
And I always try to look at it like a budget, right? Your macros are like a budget. So, like for example, if I have somebody who's very fast metabolism, and I had a client named Noah Chang, and this guy got to the point where he was having to eat almost 700 grams of carbs and 200 grams of fat in the off season just to maintain his weight. His metabolism was so fast, and he was constantly bloated because he was trying to quote unquote eat clean, right? He must have been eating well over 100 grams of fiber a day. And he was just like, oh, I'm miserable. Please don't add any more calories. And I said, well, Noah, your macros are so high. Why don't you just eat a little bit of junk? You know, like have some Pop-Tarts or have a little bit of pizza or whatever. You know, because he's basically got $1 million budget, right? Like if you make $1 million in a year, is it okay to go out and buy a $100,000 car? Yeah, it's probably okay. You know, if you make $50,000, is it okay to go out and buy a $100,000 car? Probably not. So if you're dieting for a show and your carbs are down to 100 grams a day, is it a good idea to spend 75 grams of those carbs on 2 Pop-Tarts? Probably not, right? Because it's not going to be very filling, and it's going to leave you in a very big deficit in terms of fiber compared to your overall carb intake. But if you've hit your fiber requirement, you've hit your micronutrient requirement, why is it not okay? You know, why it's, you know, and people will say, wow, there's preservatives and there's all this stuff. Look, and I'm not going to try to convince the people who are already convinced that all preservatives are evil and are making your mind controlled by the government, because those people just are beyond saving. But I will say that there really is no data to suggest. What you got to keep in mind is anything is a poison in the right dose. The devil is in the dosage. And anything is the poison in the right dose. Are preservatives and pesticides and all these things toxic? Absolutely, in the right dose. Do you get enough of that in an average daily intake? No, not at all. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I think Zoe, and you can comment on this. I think that part of the problem is like flexible dieters. They tend to kind of like flaunt. We tend to kind of flaunt that we don't eat clean, right? Because it's almost like a counterculture pushback against quote unquote eating clean, because you find it almost like so, and I'm guilty of this, find it kind of sanctimonious, and so you're like, yeah, well, look at me, I'm getting shredded, and here's this, this Pop-Tart I just ate. And so people get the wrong idea. They think that's all the people eat. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, especially on social media like Instagram, for example, where all you see is people's photos. If you're a flexible dieter, you're not going to post a picture of your chicken and your broccoli and your white rice that you eat every day. You're going to post a picture of the fun foods. So I think that gives that gives off the wrong impression to people who maybe are not familiar with flexible dieting. They think that that's all we eat is all we post.
Yeah, yeah. It was funny. I've been working with Diana Dahlgren for about just a little bit under a year now, and she had all kinds of food issues when she came to me. And I don't mind talking about this because I think she wouldn't mind, because she's talked about this on the air. I mean, she had a full-blown eating disorder. And just telling her, look, you can have these foods if you hit your macros and your fiber. It doesn't happen for everybody, but it pretty much solved her eating disorder almost instantaneously. I mean, it was like a few weeks, and she was basically problem-free for the most part. And she started dropping, And so she made a post on Instagram one day. She said, I have a confession to make. And it was a picture of her abs, now. And she's like, I have a confession to make. I don't do hours of cardio. I don't do tilapia and asparagus. I eat cookies. I eat pizza. I drink wine. All this sort of stuff.
Right.
And she's like, but I'm healthier than I've ever been. And it was interesting, the reaction that she got. I think the girls who got it, and a lot of people who got it, who had been down that road of an eating disorder, they understood that she was referring to her mental health,
right,
and physical health too, because she wasn't going through these binge starve cycles, right? But there were so many people that said, "Wow, how can you're such a terrible role model for girls?"
Yeah.
They're going to think they can eat cookies and be healthy. And it's like, well, she was kind of saying it for a shock effect, but she's not saying that's all she eats. I mean, she still eats plenty of foods that are good for you. But, I mean, she told me, she was like, later, she said, it's amazing and I get this from a lot of clients, even the ones who aren't back down to the body fat they want to be at, they say, it's just amazing to be free of food, to not have food be an anchor anymore.
Oh, yeah.
So it sounds like you've had kind of that experience, right?
I have, and actually, when you were talking about the whole what is the definition of clean eating, it reminded me of back when I first started working with my first online coach, and like I mentioned, he was giving me meal plans. I remember, I emailed him one day. I was like, hey, just out of curiosity, is there any way I can get salmon on my meal plan? And he said no. He said no, it's too high fat, and because of that, I thought I had it ingrained in my mind that, clean, salmon's bad for me.
Yeah.
It's on the bad food list. So after that, I was terrified of eating salmon.
Right.
Because in my mind, or according to his definition, it was not clean.
Yeah, and one of the problems that creates is, like you said, anytime you create a good bad, and there's studies on inclusive diet versus exclusive dieting, which is basically what we're talking about. Clean eating is essentially exclusive dieting, and we're going to have Ben talk about this more because he's a registered dietitian and he can tell us more about kind of the clinical implications of this. And anytime you tell somebody good versus bad, you create kind of a dangerous scenario, because it's like this forbidden fruit. So
Yeah.
if I tell you, and this is what I've seen with clients who have come from this background, if something's bad, if they eat any of it whatsoever, they go nuts, because it's like they have no idea how to moderate it, because it's like, well, I've already blown my diet, I might as well just have as much as I want, right? And so that's what they say, like pizza, ice cream, whatever, they go crazy. Whereas the reality is, if they had a slice of pizza, does that ruin their diet? Probably not, but if they have the whole thing, is that going to set them back? Well, yeah, absolutely, and in reality, the thing with the salmon is, yes, it's higher in fat, but what if you keep your fat lower the rest of the day, and you have that salmon and you're able to still hit your macronutrient intake? Is there really any evidence that that's going to cause you to gain more body fat? I've never seen that evidence, right? And I think having that option of choice is very important. So I think we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back. We're going to bring Ben Esgro into this discussion, and talk to him and get kind of a clinical aspect of clean eating versus IIFYM. You're listening to Physique Science Radio, and we'll be right back. Hey guys, Lane here. Well, you all know how much I love variety in my diet. I can't stand eating the same bland food every single day. That's why I love www.myoatmeal.com. It's an amazing website where you can go and customize oatmeal. I know. Why would I want to go customize oatmeal? I can eat it right out of the bag. Well, let me tell you why. MyOatmeal.com has 22 billion combinations of flavors and ingredients. You heard me right. 22 billion combinations. Whether you're picking out a pre-made blend or making your own customized blend, they have all kinds of flavors. Want red velvet cake? No problem. Snickerdoodle? You can make it happen. Butter rum? Oh yeah. Cheesecake? You can get it done. And you have all kinds of additives you can add. Apples, raisins, pears, nuts, all kinds of seeds. And you can sweeten it any way you want. Need to eat gluten-free? No problem. They've got it. The best part of it all? The macros are listed as you're customizing your blend, and they change depending on which ingredients you add. Eating a little bit lower carb? No problem. Choose ingredients that make your carb count lower. Need more protein? Add higher protein ingredients. You can customize your blend to make it almost any breakdown that you want, and the prices and macros change as you change your blend. So go on over to www.myoatmeal.com and check out some of the blends that have already been made, or be adventurous and make your own. That's myoatmeal.com. Check it out, guys. Hey guys, one of the things that's always on my mind is how can I give back to the industry that has done so much for me? That's why we formed the BioLane Foundation. The BioLane Foundation is a philanthropic initiative to raise money for grad school level research that is going to contribute to the fitness industry. And 100% of all your donations will be paid out to students. If you'd like to donate, you can go to biolane.com, click on the About tab, and click on BioLane Foundation, and you can put your donation in through there. Or if you're a student and you'd like to apply for a grant, go to biolane.com, click the About tab, BioLane Foundation, and you can find the applications online there. Thank you guys so much, and I'm looking forward to all the great research that comes from these donations. We're back with Physique Science Radio. I'm your host, Lane Norton, with my co-host, Sohee Lee, and our special guest tonight, Ben Esgro. Ben is a pro natural bodybuilder and a competitive powerlifter, national level powerlifter, but he's also a registered dietitian and has a master's in nutrition and is a great coach in and of himself. He also owns De Novo Nutrition, which is a supplement company. And like I've been saying, I think he's one of the smartest guys in the industry that isn't really well known yet. But we're working hard to change that. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. Well, Sohee and I have been talking about clean eating versus IIFYM, but I'm a PhD, so I'm kind of on the research side of things. Sohee has added kind of psychological implications of macros versus clean. Well, let me back up here real quick. And this is something. Okay, I'm gonna go off on a tangent real quick. If you do clean eating, you still do macros. Okay, clean eaters, please do not say I don't do macros. That's like speaking and saying I don't do the alphabet. Okay, it's just yeah. Okay, it's like jumping up and down saying I don't do gravity. All right. Yes, you do that. You just may not be aware of what it is. Okay. Now that rant's done. Ben, we've been talking about, like I said, the psychology of it, that sort of thing, our experiences with it. But as a scientist, from a clinical perspective, is there any evidence that, if you meet your protein, carb, fat, fiber goals, your micronutrient goals, those sorts of things, is there any evidence that, eating specific foods might have some kind of body compositional benefit versus other foods?
There is absolutely nothing I'm aware of. If there was something, I would be very interested in seeing it. So if anybody is listening and actually has a valid peer-reviewed study showing this, please send it to any of us. We'd all be happy to look it over. And I think, Lane, you've mentioned numerous times why we haven't seen this yet is because at the heart of it, you're always counting macronutrients. And that's how really the control of a lot of these diet intervention studies are done. I mean, I don't want to go off on a tangent myself.
No,
but,
please do.
I think this kind of has been popularized because of the popular correlation is causation mentality with a lot of things, and indirectly. Obviously, if you eat more voluminous foods that are going to make you feel fuller, that are high fiber and lower in fat, which typically the magical quote-unquote clean foods consist of, you're obviously going to indirectly be restricting more calories. So the problem with that, though, is obviously, number one, this is not a sustainable system. What happens with a lot of these people is they come off the diet and they start binging. And what do they go for first? The calorie-dense foods that they weren't eating. So this is something that anybody in nutrition, and Lane, again, I know I've heard you say this before as well, nutrition is a battle of attrition. So you want something that is sustainable long-term, something that's flexible. One thing that's really important as well is you want a diet that you can adjust based on standardized measures. A food-based diet cannot be adjusted that way. You can't just say, take away some chicken, take away some broccoli. That's the problem.
That's an excellent point, Ben. And I'm going to jump in real quick because
Sure.
I've seen people who I've worked with, and I'm sure you've had the same experience.
Yep.
They will say, you know what, my coach, I got to 6 weeks out and I wasn't progressing, so they just dropped my carbs. They said no more starches. Because that's really, if you're not having some kind of quantitative, objective measure of what you're taking in, that's what they do. I mean, that's what it is. It's okay, well, no more starches, or no more this, or they cut out a food group, or you made the point that these are typically voluminous foods that make you feel full and are high in fiber, right? And so people will say, like I heard one time say, well, I eat steak until 6 weeks out, and then I switch that's fish, and that fish just leans me up so much, and so they think the fish is some kind of magical food.
I don't know why, but fish works.
well, Ben, that fish actually, the reason it thins your skin out is because it swims underneath the subcutaneous layer and gobbles up all the water. But no. When in reality, the reason that you got so much leaner on the fish as compared to the steak is your total calorie intake dropped, because now instead of getting 12 grams of fat per serving, you're getting 1 gram of fat per serving. If you're doing that 3 times a day, that's 36 grams of fat. That's almost 300 calories. There's a significant difference there. Whereas if you said, okay, well, instead of doing that, let's take this certain amount of macros off. They could keep the steak. They would have to take in smaller amounts, control portions, and be more specific. The other thing I really think is interesting, and one of my a guy in Australia who came to one of my camps, his name's Christian O'Grady, and he's a funny guy, but he's very abrasive. And somebody was posting on their page about clean eating, and he was posting about how it was kind of he thought it was nonsense, and that why not just track your macros? And they said, well, I just think the people who do the IIFYM are lazy. And then she said, I don't have time to track my macros. He said, wait, so you're so hardcore that you would basically trade an eating disorder for actually knowing what you're intaking. That's what you're saying. He said, so it's easier to eat so these people are lazy, but you are not willing to track your intake.
I think that's a funny misconception. Well, not funny. I'm saying that obviously sarcastically. Misconception about people who track macros is that it means that they're eating shit all day. Like they're just eating junk food all day, and it's this free for all about not eating quote unquote healthy foods, which we classify as a nutrient dense food. And that's obviously not the case. You're just being accountable for what you're doing, and that's really all this is it's a system of being accountable. Whereas
exactly
when you're classifying the food as clean versus dirty, what does anybody ever learn from that? The problem is with that stuff, you are encouraging someone to have a disordered view of foods, because they believe then that the foods are kind of have mythical properties, and or is it you know what I'm trying to say?
Magical properties, yeah. No, absolutely. But you know what? That is not just a competitive thing. That permeates throughout society. In 2007, I believe the American Dietetic Association polled America, and they asked, "What do you believe is more important, the portion control or the type of food, the amount of food you eat, or the type of food you eat?" And 70% of people said the type of food you ate was more important.
Yeah.
Now, so you mentioned that there were some interesting studies on the psychology behind this. Did you want to? Yeah. Tell us about some of those, because I want to get Ben's take on them.
Well, you mentioned this briefly earlier, Lane, and I know that a lot of us have experienced it with our own personal lives. But there have been studies that show that as soon as you put a food off limits, our craving for it actually increases that much more. Even if let's say, like, for example, chocolate. Yeah, I like chocolate, but I don't love it. I'm not gonna go crazy for it. But as soon as you say, Sohi, you can't have chocolate ever, 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 ever again, all of a sudden I wake up the next day and I'm like, wow, I really want chocolate.
Yeah.
Just
exactly.
because it's forbidden, and it's I know we all have experienced that, but it's been scientifically proven to be a real phenomenon.
Well, think about when you were a kid and your parents told you cannot do this, whatever this thing is. You can under no circumstances ever do this. What was the one thing you really wanted to do? That, right?
Yep.
Because it's like, well, this must be awesome if I can't do it. You know what I mean? But like I said, the problem becomes when it's all about the types of foods. You lose portion control, right? The reason that people will tell me, well, do you really think somebody can get fat on chicken and broccoli? I said, well, yeah, it'd be hard, because
exactly.
you're eating. It's such a fiber dense food. You would have to, eat a ton of it. To you would probably stop before you ever. I will be honest. You'd probably stop before you ever got there just from GI distress.
Right.
I talk about fiber being great, but folks, you can overdo the fiber intake. Okay, if you go over 70, 80 grams of fiber a day, you're not gonna feel real great. But yeah, it's interesting that it even skews their perception of these foods in ways we never even thought of. I had one gal come to me and she said, I can't eat gluten because I know I'm gluten intolerant. I said, oh, did you get a food allergy test done? She's like, no, I just know I'm intolerant. Mm-hmm. Well, it ends up the only time she would eat gluten was when she was binging, right? Because gluten was a forbidden food.
Yeah.
Right. So you couldn't have anything with gluten. So I said, well, okay, well, try this. Eat 2 slices of bread and let me know if you get this bloating problem. And she comes back the next day, she goes, oh my God, I'm not allergic to gluten. And I was like, yeah, well, when you're not eating 2,000 calories along with it, it's amazing how much less bloated you feel,
Yep.
So, I think people, again, you miss that when you're not precisely tracking macronutrient intake. I mean, like you said, Ben, it's just a system of accountability. And the NHANES data, I think from like a decade ago, that they, and I may butcher this study, but you're probably familiar with it too, because I think it's a really classic study of nutrition.
Yep.
And they looked at who are people who were successful in losing at least 20% of their body weight, I think it was. 20% of their body weight, and then keeping it off for at least 5 years. So successful, sustained weight loss. And the number one thing was self-monitoring. They practiced some form of self-monitoring, right? And like we were talking about, sustainability is very important. Can you sustain results? And no, I don't care who you are, you can't eat tilapia and asparagus every day for the rest of your life. I saw somewhere, a while back where some coach was kind of backtracking on everything and trying to defend their methods, essentially their starvation methods, and said, well, there's these metabolic issues. People wouldn't, it's not really a problem because if they would just stay on their diets all year round, they wouldn't gain this body fat. And it's like, okay, sure. So just tilapia and asparagus every meal for the rest of your life. Yeah. Raise your hand if you can do that.
I think there's two concerning. I think the two most concerning points to me about the entire even issue with clean foods is that number one is that I think, and this isn't just fitness, this is general population as well, is people think they have to suffer when they're on a diet or it's not working. It's almost like this strange masochistic viewpoint. And really the second one that we've kind of alluded to, that for me is the most concerning because we're never going to move forward if we never accept this, is that you never actually address the underlying mechanisms behind what's changing your body composition if you base it on foods. And I think that's a major issue because, again, it becomes so obsessive about the broccoli, the chicken, the fish, and the one thing that I think all of us have seen with working with anybody and having individuals count macros is they do learn a lot more in the process. It's not this, this brainless, like, tell me what to eat during this. They actually say, wow, okay, you do learn to understand your own thresholds. And a lot of really important things, I think, for people lifelong. I mean, this is a lifelong sustainable system. That's why I have a hard time seeing anything really, well, it's not magical. It's not like it's a fad, but really replacing this because, again, it's accountable and it allows you to live a normal life if you simply weigh stuff and track stuff.
That's absolutely right. And now it's gotten so easy with so many apps out there for tracking that it really, people say, it's just so much time out of my day. Really? You can't punch in like 2 buttons on your phone? It's really
Takes just a few minutes.
Yeah, and the other thing is too is once you've gotten used to it, I'll be honest, I can go on vacation and I can guesstimate, and I bet I'm within 10%. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I go on vacation and I don't gain 10 pounds. I don't gain 5 pounds. I might gain a pound. You know what I mean? And a lot of times it's because I wanted to gain a pound if I was still training, Yeah. So, like you said, Ben, it's all about sustainability. I talk to people because people will say, well, look at this person who got results from clean eating. We're not saying that you can't get results from it. Right. That's not what we're saying at all. Certainly, plenty of people have gotten results by doing that. But the problem becomes after the diet's over. After it's over and the gloves are off and you start shoveling down all that food that you didn't have access to before, and you put on more body fat. All right, and for the most part, that's this is going to get into kind of the metabolic adaptation stuff, but it becomes a problem when it's over and over a multitude of cycles. I mean, I'm sure you guys know various people who they started out before they ever kind of started dieting. And they were pretty lean, and now they're much fatter than when they started.
Oprah Winfrey.
Yeah, actually, Sony, kind of take us, walk us through that, because we're writing a book right now on reverse dieting.
Yeah.
And you had a very interesting take on Oprah's, kind of yo-yo dieting.
Right.
And just full disclaimer, we're not trying to pick on Oprah. We're just using her because, her weight has kind of been out in the public eye.
Yeah, well, this is, I always use her as a prime example of remember that I remember the whatever, was it the vlog, I think, or an article you wrote about why weight loss diets make you fat.
Yes.
And I say, just look at her, and it happens to so many of us. But I'm actually looking at the page right now. This is from the book Willpower by Baumeister and Tierney, two psychologists. But the chapter is called The Perfect Storm of Dieting, and it talks all about why diets don't work. And so it just outlines Oprah Winfrey's weight fluctuations. So first she starts out at 125 pounds, working as a newscaster. This is early on in her career. She goes to 140 pounds. She goes, oh my gosh, I put on 15 pounds, have to get it off. She goes on a 1,200 calorie diet, back down to 125. That was, 1 month.
Right.
1 month, 15 pounds. Couple months later, she was 212 pounds.
Ooh.
She went on an all liquid diet for 4 months. Got back down to 145. Notice that's still 20 pounds over her initial weight. Then a few years after that, she finds herself at 237 pounds. At that point, and she just resorts to more and more drastic measures because she finds that her body has just stopped responding to the deficit. So she hires a full-time personal trainer, a full-time chef who lives at her home, and they do all these things. And finally, she's 160 pounds. Again, 35 pounds above her original weight. This is in 2005. It's a big deal. She's on the cover of a magazine. And then a few years after that, she's back up to 200 pounds.
Yep.
So.
And she had. Well, I'm not gonna disguise my dislike for Dr. Oz. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. I do not like the man. I don't care how good of a surgeon he is. Just because I have DR in front of my name, I'm not gonna go try to perform heart surgery. So I would appreciate if he stopped talking about nutrition, because he doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, there's that rant. But he'll talk about the latest fad diets and he'll praise them and all that sort of thing. And there's a lot of people out there like this. And I think part of it is that it's hard to sell something like flexible dieting.
Oh, it's very hard.
It's hard to sell if it fits your macros, because what are you actually saying? You're saying, you know what, there are no magic foods. It's just a lot of work. You're going to have to be accountable. You're going to have to do this. And somebody's going to say, well, that sounds like I have to learn this whole system, and it's a lot of work. And, if there's no magic foods, what do I need you for? I want to hire a guru, who's gonna teach me the ways of the mystical, process. And I think that really is part of the problem, that that people think there kind of is this magic foods. And Ben, you were talking about how it doesn't teach you anything, and you're absolutely right. In fact, earlier in my career, when people would come to me and say, I know you're a big, IIFYM guy, but I don't want to do that. I want to, eat clean. I want to do a meal plan. I don't want to think about it. And I would write up meal plans. Now, I actually stopped doing that. One, because in the state I'm in, Florida, that's illegal unless you're a registered dietitian. So I don't do that. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of coaches who still do that in the state of Florida.
Oh, yeah.
My guess is they're probably ignorant of the law because they don't really take it seriously. But that's another rant for another time. But even if I had had an RD, was an RD myself, I would not make up meal plans for people. In fact, if somebody requests it, I tell them, no, you need to go to somebody else, because I'm not interested in working with somebody who wants to be spoon-fed. Because I want them to learn. Because I tell them, if I do my job correctly, eventually you won't need me anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think that scares the crap out of a lot of weight loss coaches. That idea that they won't be needed anymore.
Right.
And that's why my guess is why some coaches won't give macros. Now, I will tell you a funny line. A gal I worked with, she went to her old coach, who this is somebody who coaches a lot of people, and she said, I'd like to find out what my macros are, and he goes, what's that?
No.
But the sad thing is,
Wow.
I think if you talk to a lot of these experts on TV, they would say the same things, right?
Oh
It's not me
yeah.
just trying to pick on this one person. And like I said, again, I don't have any magic to sell people, and I think that can turn some people off. But we're talking about sustainability. And I think that's really important. So I think we're going to take a quick break. Ben, if you wouldn't mind hanging on the line with us, we're
Sure.
going to come back, and I think we talk about a little bit about practically how you implement something like flexible dieting. Um, how you guys do it with yourselves and your clients, and we'll wrap it up there. You guys listen to Physique Science Radio, and we'll be right back. Hey guys, you know me, and you know I love cooking up macro-friendly option meals. But sometimes when I'm always on the go, that's just not an option. So when I'm on the go or can't cook a meal, I love Quest bars. You know I love protein and fiber, and these are packed with 20 grams of high quality protein and super high in fiber. And it's easy to stay on target when you've got Quest bars that you can bring with you anywhere. They're delicious compared to other bars that taste like bricks and leave you feeling gassy and bloated. So pick up a bar of Quest bars today at questnutrition.com, GNC, and Vitamin Shop. Also, follow them on Instagram at Quest Nutrition and youtube.com/Quest Nutrition for great recipe ideas to keep you on your goals but eating delicious. You're listening to Physique Science Radio with Lane Norton and Sohee Lee. If you like what you hear and you'd like to learn more about us, read some of our articles, please visit my website at www.biolane.com and Sohee's website at soheefit.com. Thanks guys, we appreciate you listening and hope to hear more from you in the future. Welcome back to Physique Science Radio. I'm your host, Lane Norton, here with my co-host Sohee Lee and Ben Esgro. Ben, over the break, you were saying something about how even, from a clinical perspective, there are no essentially clean eating diets prescribed by any medical professional or anybody, nothing in the literature, that everything is basically kind of either an exchange or macro based. There are no food elimination diets. Expand on that for us.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, even when you look at any kind of clinical scenario in a hospital, the only type of food elimination diet you're going to get is for a medical condition that actually warrants it. For example, like you will typically, it's not even a food elimination. It's usually like a fat limitation for something like pancreatitis or something like that. But even for diabetics, I mean, one of the most popular systems that we have for nutrition intervention is the exchange system. That is essentially indirectly counting macros. You're breaking foods into different food groups and counting them as exchanges. That's something that I will write for some of my clients if they're not comfortable counting macros, but then indirectly we directly transition them into counting macros, because really what you're doing again is you are counting macros. I mean, basically one exchange of grains is 15 grams of carbs, 3
Right.
protein, no fat. That's macros. So this is a medical nutrition intervention, and you're essentially using macros to do it.
And I'll tell people, and Sohee, you can comment on this too. If you look through the literature, because people are like, well, you always say it's science-based. Well, what studies have compared clean eating to IIFYM? And the answer is zero. Because there is no definition of clean eating.
Right.
That if you wanted to run a study, you would get absolutely shredded by reviewers who are like, okay, what exactly is your definition of clean? That would be the biggest sticking point. I don't even know if you could get something pushed through to propose it, just because it would be so ambiguous.
There's actually another point I wanted to make that I forgot to mention before.
Go ahead.
Again, when you consider this from a health perspective, especially for micronutrition, when you're talking about eating the same exact foods every day, that is dramatically limiting your variety of. I mean, yes, these quote unquote clean things are pretty high in like dark leafy greens and stuff like that, but when you're considering that you are usually on those a dramatic caloric restriction, and you're eating the same foods all the time, it does increase your risk of deficiency. Again, the beauty of something like fitting your macros is you can eat a much more varied diet. The one
Ben,
thing that,
I'm going to jump in real quick because
sure,
I
go
think
ahead.
that's fantastic. Because one thing I always get when I talk about IIFYM is people go, "Well, what about your micronutrients? There's no
Right,
way you can get enough micronutrients if you're on IIFYM."
right.
And the fact of the matter is, there was a student at Ohio State University, and they were talking to me about a study they did, like a pilot study. So this isn't published, but their pilot study, and they were looking at exclusive dieting versus inclusive dieting. And
Yep.
basically what they used was, if it fits your macros, they just gave people macronutrient intake and told them to hit that, or they had them do paleo, right? So they had them on a food restricted diet, only paleo foods. And what they found was with their micronutrient. Now, this wasn't the primary outcome of the study, but what they found, they looked at their micronutrient intake because they were interested. And what they found was that paleo people were very high in some micronutrients and very low in others, and almost deficient level in others. Whereas people who were following IIFYM were not super high in any one micronutrient, but they were sufficient in all of them.
Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's common sense. Like that is pretty logical. Like you think you vary your intake, obviously you're going to be exposed to much more of the micronutrition. Um, yeah, it's funny because I feel like when we talk about it, it's almost it's hard to even think about how that still exists. But I
Well,
guess we'll have it that hard.
never let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Yeah, yeah,
That's what's out there a lot. And like I said, there's just so much misconception, and part of it, Sohi and I talked about it. Is counterculture. We were talking about how if you're a flexible dieter, you're not posting pictures of your chicken and broccoli. You're posting pictures of Pop Tarts and all that kind of stuff, because
yeah,
it's kind of like a pushback and saying, and you said something that was very interesting, Ben. People feel like they have to suffer,
yeah,
and the fact of the matter is, look, if you're looking to get very lean for contest, you are going to suffer at some point, regardless of what kind of diet
yep,
you're on.
yep.
But I tell people what I'm not okay with is suffering for the sake of suffering, so you can brag about having suffered the most.
Right,
Who
right.
gives a damn?
Yeah,
As long as you get the results, right? And so that's what Sohi and I were talking about is, results based, and sustainability. Because again, if you're only used to eating certain foods, Sohi, is there any psychology to kind of that rebound to that, once the gloves are off, that
You mean the
that just,
binging?
yeah, it just makes you go crazy.
Oh yeah, it's called counter-regulatory eating. In more colloquial terms, it's known as the "what the hell" effect. Um, yeah. So essentially, what happens is that you have so many rigid, strict rules for yourself for your diet, and it works as long as you're following the rules.
Mm-hmm.
But it works until it doesn't work, until
Yep.
you deviate from it just even a little bit. And then, so it's like they have this analogy that it's like you're within the boundaries of a bright line effect. And as soon as you step outside that bright line, all of a sudden you have no rules, nothing to guide you. So you say, oh, well, what the hell? I ruined this day anyway. There's no salvaging the rest of this day or the rest of this weekend or the rest of this month. I might as well just eat all the forbidden foods and do all the forbidden things before tomorrow comes and I can start clean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very pervasive attitude in the fitness industry and
Oh,
in
yeah.
dieting. Ben, have you kind of found that attitude to ring true with people you've worked with?
Oh, of course. I mean, you're doing a lot of rewiring whenever you do any kind of nutrition intervention. I mean, the tides are definitely changing, but there is still definitely a lot of that I guess I'd call it old school thought. Um, that is, it does take. It's a process. I mean, I think you probably know this better than anybody, Lane, because I think you are mostly responsible for that change in the tide, and especially working with a lot of higher level athletes who are in the untested realm. I think that still exists a little stronger, and
Oh
they
yeah.
a little stronger. So
What's interesting is I think that's almost like a fashion statement. Like I
yeah,
think it's not cool to post a picture of you eating, like a prepackaged dinner or something like, something that's
right,
full of preservatives and, quote unquote chemical shitstorm.
Right.
By the
right.
way, folks, everything is a chemical, so stop saying that. You just sound freaking stupid, okay? And then they'll say, well, you know what I mean. No, I really don't. But I think it's very important what you said, Ben, is once if you've always been taught to color inside the lines,
Yeah.
when you go outside the lines, you have the what the hell effect. That's
Like,
Sohi
yeah,
talked
like,
about.
what do I do? Yeah.
I
There's
mean,
nothing to guide them at all.
I had a client just email me this last week, and she said, she's like, I want to thank you so much because the best thing I've had happen since I've been working with you is I just went to New York for a week on a vacation with my husband. I ate out, I enjoyed myself, and when I came home, I was the same weight as when I left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's like, before I would go and I would shame myself while I was there because I would be binging when I was out. Or even, she said, even if I didn't binge, I would still come home and be 5 pounds heavier. And if I binged, it'd be 10 to 15,
Wow.
because, and part of the other thing too is, and I want to, hopefully, there's just so much to talk about. I could talk on forever, but I think a lot of times these diets create food intolerances. Have you guys seen that?
Oh, absolutely.
I have heard of it. Yes.
Ben, have you seen that where like people, they either they eat something so much they become intolerant to it, or they never eat something and they become intolerant to it because they never eat it?
I mean, that's difficult for me to say for 100% certainty because I haven't, actually been able to do any kind of objective testing. But of course, I mean, you see a lot, like multiple intolerances in people who were following these plans. Is that a high likelihood? Of course, when you don't expose yourself to something, you stop making the enzymes to digest it. You know what I mean? It's just like lactose intolerance.
Yeah, lactose is a very, very good example. Yeah, sorry, I cut you off. I'm sorry. Lactose is, I was just going to say, is an excellent example because the enzyme is inducible, and if you take in less lactose, you will have less lactase, and so if you then go and take in a bunch of lactose, you will not feel very good. And so if you're never eating these foods, and I worked with somebody who was a big IFBB, not bikini, but figure pro, and they worked with me for a while, and then they went and worked with another coach for a while, and then when they came back, they had intolerances to food they never had before.
Wow.
They just couldn't eat the same things they ate before because it would just make them so bloated, and it's just very interesting to see that. And so, it's almost like, I don't want to I hate using analogies when they aren't proper, but it's almost like a vaccine. If you're always eating different kinds of food, you're exposing yourselves to a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And your body's able to tolerate them. Whereas if you're never eating that, yes, the foods are calorically dense and you'll put on body fat because you haven't been, taking them in and you're likely binging, but you're also dealing with the fact that you're going to be extremely uncomfortable after you eat them. GI-wise, because you're going to be gaseous and bloated and those sorts of things from indigestion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an appropriate and very easily understood analogy.
Yeah. Okay, so for the last 8 or so minutes, I want to talk about how you guys implement, kind of flexible dieting for yourself and for your clients. So how do you use this with clients and with yourself in kind of a broad, 100-mile overhead view?
Well, so whenever I have prospective clients email me, every once in a while they'll say, "What is your approach to food?" And very, very briefly, to put it, I say I don't do meal plans. If that's what you're asking for, I provide. I'll give you a food list of, here's where most of your food should come from, and there on that list is, all the whole foods, quote unquote, clean foods. And then I'll say, but this is just a suggested list, and I'm going to give you some guidelines, not rules, to follow that'll help guide you. The most important being, do not put any food off limits. Unless you have an allergy or intolerance, do not do it because it's not going to work out. And I always say, you know what, if it feels easy, that's a good thing. Don't worry. I always have people coming to me, they're worried, like, this feels easy. What am I doing wrong? Which is really funny to me. I'm saying, no, this is good. Embrace it. You want it to feel easy. You want it to feel effortless. And I say,
because it's sustainable.
Exactly. And the best litmus test that I use with my clients is, whatever you're doing, however you're eating right now on a day-to-day basis, ask yourself, can you see yourself doing this exact same thing 1 year from now? still doing it? If the answer is no, what can you change? Maybe you need more gummy bears in your diet,
Mm.
or you know what I mean?
That's
Or
it.
but or if the answer is yes, then that's great. Keep doing what you're doing. That's
That
really it.
I think that really gets to the heart of the issue, right? If you can't see yourself doing that in 6 months or 12 months, you've got to rethink your process, right? Because you're just going to wind up right back where you started.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
you'll lose the 20 pounds or whatever it is, and then when you go back to eating the same things you ate before, you'll put it right back on. But my father, my father is a little bit overweight, and years ago he did a ketogenic diet, and he stuck to it for like 3 months, and he dropped like 20 pounds, and it was awesome, and we were so proud of him, and he's like, okay, I got the 20 pounds off, I'm happy. And he went back to not being on keto anymore, and very surely he put all the weight on and actually a little bit more. So,
Oh yeah.
there's your practical application right there. And I always tell people, we want to, in a perfect world, say, because people will tell me, and then Ben, I'll let you talk, but
Sure.
this just popped into my mind. People tell me, well, you can't tell me that a Pop-Tart is better for you than a sweet potato, and if you want to talk about in a vacuum. No, but that's not what we're saying.
Right.
What we're saying is that if in the context of the entire diet, if you've met all your requirements for your other macronutrients and your fiber and your micronutrients, that Pop-Tart is not going to kill you. And the difference is if it keeps you from binging or it keeps you from going crazy, then yes, it is better for you. And I actually did a talk in the UK a while back, and one of my talks was inclusive dieting versus exclusive dieting. And at the end, I said, is this better for you than this? And it was a Pop-Tart versus sweet potato. And I said, you know what? I forget the exact verbiage, but at the end I said, well, it's probably better than an eating disorder.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
that fires people up. But I mean, kind of by definition, orthorexia nervosa, by definition, if you are obsessed with eating clean, you have an eating disorder.
Oh yeah.
I think people get way too caught up in acute effects, and it's like you were talking about living in a vacuum or anything like that.
Yeah.
Or even people who will have one meal that slightly goes over an allotment, and then they'll make the whole day go off.
Yeah.
It's like they don't understand the checks and balance system of physiology as well when
Right.
you're talking about chronic long-term change. Again, that's the issue.
Well, look at intermittent fasting, and Lord knows, I'm not saying I'm a huge fan of intermittent fasting, and not that I hate it, but I just say I'm not a fan of it just because I've been kicked around so much by intermittent fasting people that I just like poking at them every once in a while now. So he knows what I mean.
Oh yeah.
But look at plenty of people have gotten lean on intermittent fasting, and you're
Yeah.
eating a huge amount of food in a short period of time. Well, people will say, well, if that's a clean eating diet where they're used to eating 8 meals a day, well, you're putting on so much fat in that 8 hours. Well, yeah, but you're also not eating the other 16
Exactly.
hours, and
It's
so
funny because if you looked at that acute in like postprandial state, you'd say they're getting fat.
exactly, because they're storing
Yep.
they're storing more body fat, but then they're burning it in the 16 hours. Now, am I saying you need to go do intermittent fasting? No, I'm not saying that. But what I have said is, the best diet for you, for the average person, and I'm not, for somebody who's just looking to lose weight. If you're going competition, obviously you have to get a little bit more neurotic about it. But the best diet is the one that you can maintain that disrupts your lifestyle the least.
Yep.
And because I always say, you cannot, no matter how hardcore you think you are, you cannot separate physiology from psychology.
Absolutely.
Okay, you just can't do it. So Ben, before I keep talking more, because I tend to dominate conversations, which is it's a terrible habit, and this show will probably do nothing to break that for me. Ben, how do you use kind of flexible dieting with your clients?
Well, kind of building on that last point of kind of merging the psychological and the physiological aspect of it. When someone comes to me, one of the questions in my questionnaire is what they prefer more, typically fat-dense foods like peanut butter or carbohydrate-dense foods, because there is typically people will have a favor to one or the other. If someone's in the middle ground, I'll use that to dictate how I'm going to allot fat and carbohydrate. But basically, I'll use that to determine percentages of fat and carbohydrate. Obviously, we know protein, keep it around the maximum level of benefit for athletes, gram per pound. But a lot of it is really all individual dependent. When I'm talking about like undulating carbohydrate days, that can vary. Some people I have 2 higher days, some people I have 3 higher days. I mean, it really is very, very flexible. But I do offer also meal plan and exchange plans. But it's interesting that with those, because I have to note that whenever I do send those, I send essentially the most, like, it's a 20-page plan, because I'm not giving them one food to eat. So really, in essence, if
You're
they
way
go,
more patient than I am.
well, what I'm trying to do with someone like that, even when they come to me, I tell them the best plan for them, not only financially, but long term, is to just go to the macro plan. But what I'm trying to do is teach them that they can live a varied life and still hit their numbers, because when I give them an exchange or a meal plan, I give them their macros for each meal and then their total macros for the day, so they see what they're actually getting. Again, in hopes of transitioning them to eventually to a macro plan. But yeah, I do a lot of talking out of those things when people come to me and they say, "Ooh, I need that plan because it's more expensive and it's probably better for me." No,
No, it's more expensive because it's more of your time.
exactly. That is literally the only. And actually, the funny part is, the issue with a lot of these things like meal plans and especially exchange is they're not as accurate as macros, because
Yep.
obviously when you try to break foods down into exchanges, nothing is purely fat, nothing is purely protein, nothing's purely carbohydrate,
Exactly.
well, except for like stuff like that. So exchange plans can be off by like 10 to 15%, and people will count their macros and compare it to their exchanges. They're like, my numbers are off. Well, then
You
count
asked
macros
for
if you
yeah.
can count macros.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna end up. You guys basically touched on everything I want to touch on. I'm not gonna. People kind of know my. If you want more information on my stuff, go to my 12th video log. I think it is. It's IIFYM versus clean eating. But I want to kind of use an example of 2 things that kind of sum up my feelings on clean eating versus IIFYM. People will say, "Well, take the most terrible stuff for you. High fructose corn syrup." People say, "You can't tell me eating all that high fructose corn syrup isn't bad for you. It's been shown over and over that obesity is caused by high fructose corn syrup." And I'm pretty sure I see people's heads explode when I tell them that that's absolutely false.
Yeah.
Now, high fructose corn syrup is very high density. It's very easy to overeat on. Absolutely. Okay. But people are not getting fat because high fructose corn syrup has some kind of magical fat storage properties. They're getting fat because it's easy to overeat on it, because it doesn't have a lot of fiber, because it's not very filling. Okay. But if you have some high fructose corn syrup every day in the context of a otherwise healthy diet and you get enough fiber, there is zero data to suggest that it's going to make you overweight. And there's actually studies showing, because high fructose corn syrup was getting a ton of hate back in the day, and people even went so far as to cut out fructose, to cut out fruit.
Oh yeah.
Because they were so scared of fructose.
Yep.
Because they say, well, there was these studies showing that the fructose caused more body fat deposition than glucose. Some of those studies were actually done down the hall from me at Illinois, and I promise you that researcher would tell you that research is grossly misinterpreted. Most of that research showing that fructose had some funky effects on fat deposition was done with a diet that was 70% fructose.
Yeah.
You cannot get a diet that is 70% fructose.
Unless
You
you're
can't.
buying fructose powder.
Unless you're buying fructose powder and dumping it in your food, okay?
Yeah.
Because even something like an apple or banana is still like 50-50 fructose glucose, okay? Yep. So stop that. So there's just not any data to support that. And actually, the data suggests that fructose in moderation actually helps with fat loss. even from a kind of an enzyme and gene regulation perspective. Now, am I saying go out and eat a bunch of fruit because it's magic? No, that's not what I'm saying. But the truth is in the middle on this kind of stuff. And then the other thing that I always kind of use to break the clean eating thing is I say when I was in college, I still love my popcorn. Ben knows this. I love air pop popcorn. And I have an air popper and I put popcorn in there and I have that, and it's extremely voluminous and very filling, and it takes me a while to eat too. So that's one of the things I love about it. Well, when I posted my diet when I was like 22 years old on an article on bodybuilding.com, people said, "Well, how can you be on contest prep and eating popcorn?" And I said, well, compared to what? Like what would you suggest? Well, oatmeal. I'm like, well, okay, well, all I know is I can eat 50 grams of carbs from oatmeal in like 5 minutes, and it takes me like 30 minutes to eat 50 grams of carbs from popcorn, so it's way more filling. And the popcorn actually has more fiber, and it has more protein, so how exactly is it not as clean? And usually the reply, well, like that's when you break down all the science and all the logic, they basically end up with, well, like that's kind of the response you get. Right. Like when you're breaking down, like, well, what is a clean food? What is not? Well, you know what it is. And
well, in my experience.
Yeah. Well, and I think
it works for me.
Yeah, I know it works for me. Well, that's that kind of appeal to authority, logical fallacy 101. Like, when people start off a debate with, well, this person used this, then you know what? We just can't even have a conversation because you don't even understand the basics of a debate. So you just need to go. Right. But I want to end on this note, and you guys can give me your perspective. One of the things that dismays me on both sides of kind of this argument is people have this kind of sanctimonious view of the way they eat. That somehow, because they either eat clean or they do flexible dieting, that makes them better than somebody else. Yeah. Let me be very clear. The way you choose to consume your food has absolutely nothing to do with how good of a person you are. So stop it. Stop acting like, stop being so sanctimonious over your food, okay? Attaching ethical properties to your food is probably one of the dumbest things I can possibly imagine. It's like the people that post, pictures of, them, well, I didn't go out with my family and here's my Tupperware full of broccoli and tilapia.
I'm on vacation.
Well, no, you're not. You're better. You're actually kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
So anyway, what do you guys think? Have you kind of seen that perspective as well? I'm sure.
It's so funny that you mentioned that because I'm well aware of the fact that people do it all the time. Clean eaters do it to flexible dieters. I'm sure we at some point or another have been guilty of doing the same to the clean eaters. But at the same time, even though I'm well aware of it, I'll be scrolling through my Facebook or my Instagram and I'll come across a photo of someone's looking all happy with a clean meal, chicken and broccoli, and they're like, clean eating is so great, and all of a sudden I actually feel bad. And I'm like, I know exactly what you're doing, but I feel like a bad person.
Yes. Don't forget to miss the fish gelatin in the bottom of your plastic bag that you're eating it out of. Make sure you get all that. Right, Ben?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's what you have to smear on your skin to thin it.
Oh God.
That's magical.
And I believe that is where we're going to end the conversation right there. Subcutaneous, subdermal,
fish gelatin.
Tilapia, fish
you
gelatin.
You have to break open your fish oil caps.
Yes, exactly. I believe this show has now officially jumped the shark. And we thank Ben for joining us on here. I'm sure we're going to have him many more times. He's great. Make sure you check out his website, www.denovonutrition.com. I'm your host, Lane Norton. For my co-host, Sohee Lee, this is Physique Science Radio. We hope you've enjoyed listening. We'll see you guys next time.